So thanks, folks, for staying on and tuning in. So tonight I'm going to talk about a topic that I think it's quite prevalent, obviously, in product management literature. It's a basic competency or fundamental skill that product managers should have, and not just product managers. I think anybody who's undergoing implementing any initiative, okay, or particularly anyone involved in strategy, and that's saying no. And what I like about this Elevate series that David has put together is, you know, I'm not going to talk about theory. I'm going to give you an example of how I said no to a 1.5 million euro deal and managed to keep my job. And you know, this isn't going to be a framework to follow. This is, you know, I'm not that wise to give sage advice to people, but I suppose what I want to do is to explain some of the mistakes, which there are many, and I probably have omitted some that I made along the journey of managing stakeholders and saying no, and hopefully you might take some learnings from them and avoid the mistakes I made and maybe some of the things I did well as well. So David has introduced me, so I'm not going to go back on and do this. It's Glen Holmes. I'm senior product manager at Workday. So I suppose we all know that we need to say no. Okay. If you look at the literature around that, you've got the Intercom and Mind the Product, all the really good people who evangelize product management and are really wise in this area, will say, you know, you've got to say no. And that's fundamentally true. Okay. But I suppose what I'd like everyone on this presentation to, you don't have to answer back in chat or anything like that, but I will just ask a question and let you reflect a bit. Was when was the last time that you actually said no to either a customer or seeing a stakeholder request? And I don't mean we'll put on the backlog. I don't mean, you know, we'll look into it. I don't mean we'll assess that. I mean saying the word no. Just no. Okay. I would imagine that if you're honest, it's probably not recent or not frequent. Okay, that you've just said no, because no is a very, you know, yes and no are very binary, right? No has connotations. No is final. No, we're not doing it. And you know, product managers, people might disagree with this, but a lot of us are human beings, and we want to be liked, and we don't want to be the bearers of, you know, bad news and straight away say no. And we like to build relationships and networks, and we don't want to be seen as this kind of, you know, blocker to things. But we need to be able to say no, right? We need to be able to prioritize things, and it's hard to say no to customers. It's incredibly hard when somebody makes a request who is at a position such as a VP, a very senior VP in your organization. Incredibly, even more difficult when it's your CEO, and even more difficult they're ganging up and they demand that you, as a product manager, implement what they want, when you know fundamentally it's not correct. So that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, right? So I'm going to tell this story in parts, okay? So I'll give you the context. So everyone needs the context, so the prelude, okay, of what it is. So the product I worked on, I was working in the life insurance industry. This was 2013, by the way. I was working in the life insurance industry, and I was working. The product I managed was a tool that allowed people who sold life insurance. Okay, so agents who sell life insurance, companies that sell life insurance, to be able to go out and meet up with an applicant and record all of the details you need for a life insurance application. So things like your medical history, your personal history, your lifestyle choices, hobbies, and things like that, and be able to capture them, you know, on a laptop or a tablet, and be able to capture that data and send that to what we call a rules engine. And that rules engine would basically take things like your personal assessment, do your personal history, so your date of birth, your salary, your postcode, things like that, do a medical assessment, so any illnesses that you have, any history of illnesses in your family, for instance, and then do a lifestyle assessment, so any hobbies, like if you're fit and you jog, but also if you tend to parachute at the weekends, that's not good for a life insurance company because it's a high risk activity. So they had things that affect the premium. And what it did, it ran a query based on the insurer's profile and the product you were applying for. It took all that information and it would come back with a answer to say, yes, we'll insure you, or no, we won't. Okay. And that worked really well. Simple, right? But really, really effective, because in life insurance applications, life insurance is what we call it's sold, not bought. So people don't tend to go and apply for life insurance. It tends to happen at certain life events. So you start a job, life insurance is part of your benefits. You get a mortgage, right? You have children, you start thinking about your mortality or something like that. You buy life insurance. But an agent would sell it generally as part of a package. And traditionally what happened, the agent came out with, a questionnaire and would ask you questions on your life insurance, and the paper questionnaire, fill it in. And that's fine if you would say, any history of illness in your family, say heart disease, and they generally have the heart disease questions and they'd answer them. And then they generally have maybe diabetes because they're common. But if you happen to say, well, I worked in Africa for a while and I contracted West Nile virus back in the day, they probably don't have the West Nile virus questions handy. So they'd have to go back to the office and say, listen, somebody will call you and ask you a bit more information on that, and we'll get back to you with an answer. We'll send it to the underwriter. So that took a long time, okay? And if anyone knows in sales, once you're doing in an interview and you're engaging with somebody, if you can give them an answer right away and be able to sell the product there and then, you have a much greater chance of making the sale. So that's what our product did. It got all this information. It allowed you to capture all this information on the applicant, run it through a rules engine, and give you a result. So that was the product. Okay, that's just the context of what I was working in. Okay, the market we worked in, or we had as a company, was quite good. In EMEA, we were really strong. We were kind of every big name insurer that you can think of in Europe actually had our product. We were really the dominant player in the market. In Americas, we were growing very, particularly in South America, we were doing quite well, and in North America, we were growing rapidly. And North America is a different life insurance market. I won't go into that tonight, but we some big brands in North American market, and we had a strategy to really penetrate that market. And we were building products to basically execute that strategy. And then there was this, which I'm going to talk about tonight, it's out in Asia Pacific. We were big in the English speaking parts of the world, so in Australia, New Zealand. We weren't big in Japan, as the song goes, but rest of Asia, we literally no presence at all. And that was a big emerging market. So one of the pillars of the business strategy we had was to grow our presence in emerging markets in Asia. So that was a business strategy. Okay. Now, how we were going to do that was another question. But that was the business strategy. So we think of OKRs, or outcome was to be, a certain penetration percentage in the Asian market. So I'll give you the context of the request. So what was this no that I had to say no to, or try say no to? And it was we had a VP of sales who was really, he was an excellent VP of sales, and he had moved to Asia market for this strategy, to execute this strategy, to build up our presence there. And he had engaged with the largest insurer in the region, and the region we're looking after was the Asian market, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So that's Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Singapore. Okay, so our VP contacted the largest insurer in the region, and was basically, had a really good relationship, and they were very interested in our product. Okay, but the problem they had, the inhibitor for adoption for them, was that in the Asian market, this is 2013, remember, the Wi-Fi connectivity in the region is really poor. Okay, was really poor. And if you look at kind of the geography of that, it's quite fragmented. So there's lots of islands, particularly in Indonesia and Philippines. Wi-Fi connectivity is not great, and so they were saying, well, if our agents have to go out with your tablet or laptop, meet a client, and then they kind of can't ask the questions because there's no connectivity, they can't get an answer because there's no connectivity, no point in really spending the millions on your product. So they suggested, if you had an offline version of your product, so if we could have an app, maybe we have on a laptop where we could go in and questions and get the answers there and then, that would be like phenomenal. That would be, we definitely buy your product. And of course, the VP just heard, we definitely buy your product. So he got interested. So he contacted our CEO. Our CEO obviously had a business strategy to go after this region, and had to deliver to his shareholders. And they contacted the CTO in Dublin, who contacted the VP of engineering. You'd notice there's no product involved in this. And they said, well, what would it take? Could we build an offline version of the application? So this is 10 years old, hundreds of thousands of lines of code. How long would it take to build an offline version that could do this? So they got together, the boffins, and they put together, and they said, it would take probably 10 months. It would take 2 development teams, 2 Scrum teams. Now, this organization, we had 4 Scrum teams across the organization. So this is half of our development resources going to be taken to deliver this offline product to this customer. And it'll cost about 1.5 million euros. And the customer said, perfect, love it, let's go with it. So this landed on my desk. Okay, so straight away my product management spidey senses kind of kicked in, and I said, wait, hold on, this is really anti-product management stuff, okay? And it's basic stuff, right? It's like we're delivering for one customer at the expense of everybody who pays license fees. All of our customers who pay license fees who expect, updates to the product, new features, and new value. We're kind of not delivering to them. We've already got this American strategy that we're building products for and executing. It's going to impact that. And right, it aligns to that business strategy. But this is a major impact on on the product strategy of the organization. So, I don't think we should do this. But I thought to myself, okay, this is just bizarre, and I'm going to have to do something about it. And the first lesson I learned really is that never assume that someone else has thought about the tactics to accomplish their strategy. So, sometimes we hold people in great esteem, and these were very smart people. My CEO was very smart, VP, smart people. The strategy was, make it big in Asia. And it was kind of like, whatever it takes. They were the tactics. So I was presented with this dilemma where, I've got to go, okay, I really don't think we should do this. But, as product manager, I need to research and understand why, and and not be biased, and try to see if there's a reason we should do it, and let's do a bit of research. So the first thing I did was that I'm going to do my research. Okay, so I'm going to put the product management hat on. I'm going to get focused and see what the kind of is this a viable thing, or should we do it? So I looked at kind of 4 trends across the market, which were the demographics, infrastructure, digital trends, and investments. And across the Asian network or region, about 54% of the population were under 30, right? And the middle class was really growing middle class and growing urbanization. So people were moving from rural into cities, okay? So as an insurer, this is really attractive because, it's better to insure people for life insurance who are young, right? Because they tend to die less and become ill less, right? As harsh as that is, that's the key customer. But middle class, wealthy people, that's who you're focusing on. And particularly in Asia, life insurance is seen as a kind of in this Southeast Asia region, it's seen as kind of a status symbol. So, if you have a pension and you have life insurance, it's a certain accolade. You show wealth, And then the digital trends was higher smartphone ownership. So 70% of the people had smartphones. So which is higher than the rest of the world, right? And smartphones tend to only work really well when they're connected to something, not when they're offline. Wireless home router ownership is 77% compared to global average of 54%. And Facebook's largest user base per capita in any 2 cities in the world was Bangkok and Jakarta. And as you know, Facebook never has had an offline version. So there was a lot of digital readiness. There was people already engaging online, the core demographic. So people were, online and didn't seem to have these problems. So we're wondering, is this a problem? We looked at the infrastructure. So 62% of telcos were investing in what we call long-term evolution networks. So the high capacity networks, 5G, 6G at the time, like long-term. And that's higher than the rest of the world. Anybody been to Singapore, a very futuristic city, is the world's most mobile ready nation. It's first 4G. And then from a government perspective, investment and in political investments, there was a thing called the Palapa Ring project. So it was the largest fiber investment in the history of the world at the time, $700 million, and it was connecting all the islands around Southeast Asia. It was 50,000 kilometers of fiber cables. Another interesting thing was laws in Malaysia and Thailand make it mandatory to have Wi-Fi in medium to large size restaurants. Now, going back to how life insurance is sold, an agent will come in and it's quite old school. So you'll wine and dine your customer. So you'll bring them to a restaurant, you'll sell them a financial package, life insurance being one of them. And if there was laws in place that Wi-Fi was mandatory, why do you need an offline application? Okay. And then Indonesia set up 6,000 internet centers nationwide to connect 72,000 villages. So there's all this compelling data that said, even if we were to build this offline application, right, in a year's time, probably the connectivity is so good that the application is useless anyway. It's everybody's going to be connected, right? So it's a waste of time for everybody. So I thought this is fantastic, coupled with the data that we have around, obviously the standard product management stuff of 50% of our development resources are going for one customer, and it's going to affect all our other business strategy. I thought this is great. This is an easy win. Okay, so I presented my research. I got my CEO and VP, and I was like, this guy. I presented it, and they sat around. They went, know something, Glenn, that's amazing. Brilliant research. Well done. God, we were going to do something stupid there. And I'm glad all your great data has convinced us not to. So, you know, I'm glad you said no. And that's not actually what happened. Okay, what happened was I got told, that's really interesting, Glenn. That's some interesting research, and well done. I never heard of Palapa Ring project. That's quite interesting. So when can you go and build this? Right. So can you go and do this offline thing? Because you know we want to do it. And I just thought to myself, okay, this is not good, because I was like, okay, my research didn't really want. So I wanted to say no. I didn't want to say no blindly. I wanted to say no backed up with data, backed up with a reason for saying no to a very large stakeholder. And I thought about this, and I was naive, and I wish I had seen this quote before I went into that meeting. And it's like every time you visit a conference, I hear the same problems faced for professionals. CEO doesn't listen to me. They switch off. They don't understand my point of view. But in the majority of cases, that's like my fault and not theirs. Okay. And I thought about this, and I realized that the lesson I learned from it is you never pitch your idea at a meeting, right? So it's not like the movies where, you know, the heroes or some character is about to get to die, or, you know, something bad's going to happen, and they come out with a great speech and everybody kind of agrees, okay, that's fantastic. I understand, and you've changed all our minds. And that's not really what happens, because when your meetings start, people already have their positions decided. So I went into that meeting with my CEO. My CEO is very close to the VP of sales. So I went in to say no with all this wonderful data to back up my decision. And the VP was sitting there after probably having a conversation with the VP of sales going, yeah, we're definitely going to do this. This is a big opportunity, being really excited. Has the customer calling them saying, when are we starting this? So I had all this kind of influence in them already. So, you know, my data really wasn't going to change their mind, or certainly convince them enough. And even if he did look at it and go, that's really compelling, and Glenn has a really good point here, and it shouldn't change. People behave differently in groups. Again, all those influences in that room weren't gonna be stronger than my arguments, no matter how compelling I believed they were. And pitching to an entire room at once is really, really hard, right? So the mistake I made was like convincing that I'm going to have all this wonderful data, and they're going to believe they're just going to say, take my no as what we should do and run with it, okay? And the lesson number 3 I learned was that your research, no matter how good you think it is, won't beat bias. So if somebody's compelled to do something, or somebody really thinks that's the right thing to do and wants to do it and is excited about something, it's very hard, no matter how compelling your research is, to beat that bias, you know? So, you know, you're saying, why do we do research then? But there is a reason to it, but facts don't beat the highest paid person's opinion, right? So if you want to do it, if they want to do it and want to execute and want you to deliver on something that has a negative impact to your product strategy, that goes against your product management principles, and they will, if they want you to do it, you're in a quandary, right? And you have 3, I suppose, options, right, in this situation. So you want to say no, okay? You want to say no to this. You can leave the organization. You can say, you're not my type of product organization, right? I'm a principal product manager. You're going against every kind of fundamental law of product management there. You know, you're one customer focused. You're impacting the current strategy that we've developed to deliver value. You're using all our resources for this. Right, it aligns to the business strategy, and you know, product management about delivering value, but it's just the antithesis of what I want to do. And you can leave the company, and that's fair enough if you want to do that. But if that's the way you do it, you'll probably leave a lot of companies, because there's a certain pragmatism required in product management or in any job. And there is, and I'm not saying compromise, because the other end of the scale is you just do what they asked. You say, right, I did my job, I researched, I did everything I could, so I'll just execute. And I don't think that's probably the right thing to do either, because again, you're the architect of competitive advantage as a product manager. You're about delivering value, and if that's going to impact the value, the value of your strategy you already have, the value that you've probably realized, and you talk about hypothesis, and you understand that you're going to deliver that value. If it impacts that, then you're not doing your job as a product manager either. So what do you do? Well, you kind of find a way of delivering some value or something that the stakeholders can feel, and mitigate as much as you can, or entirely, any impact on your current product strategy. And this is what kind of I decided to do, and what there's a method behind this. So I had a crusade. Okay. So I thought, let's follow me. Let's put on the product management hat. So another mistake I made was that this is what I probably should have done at the beginning, right? So I didn't really think in the whole product management about understanding the problem, the real problem to be solved, and defining it and saying, well, is there another way we can solve this? I kind of thought my brilliant research around why we shouldn't do this initiative at all would just work. And I didn't realize the kind of impact on the wider stakeholders, and my stakeholder management was quite poor. But I decided I would try to learn from the first mistake. And the first one says, don't fall in love with your research. So what I mean by that is that your research was to say no. So I wanted to say no, and I had all this data to back it up. And what I even see a lot of people, and I've done it before, is that you just keep on referring back to it. You go, because it's brilliant and you've done it all and that's everything. And that should be enough to convince them. And you keep on going, well, look, we shouldn't do it. And, there's all this investment and we're wasting our time. Move on and think of other ways to do it. So you need to kind of get past your own research and realize that if it doesn't work initially, there are other methods that you need to do in order to convince somebody to take your no for an answer. And then lesson 5 is when you're trying to say no, don't take no for an answer. Okay. What I mean by that is that my CEO, I was saying no to the strategy. My CEO was saying no to my no. And now I wanted to say no to his no to my no. Right? That makes sense. What I mean is that there are ways in which don't just accept it. So don't just go like, I'm going to leave or I'm going to do it. Figure out, is there a possible solution, or is there some way in which my no means that it won't affect the strategy of the product, right? So it won't make an impact on me, but I can deliver in some way, somebody appease the stakeholders in some way. And if there's a method to doing that, and often you'll find if you kind of dig deep enough and you go what we call back to first principles, there are ways in which everyone can win, and you can at least mitigate any impact to your product strategy. And how to do that is we look at how do we present solution options, okay, choices to people. So again, going back to no and yes being very binary. What I like is it's no because, and here is something we can do instead, or here are other options. I think that's the best kind of conversation to have. Particularly, I'm not saying with everybody, there's things you just say no to, no, for sure. But if you've got a very high-powered stakeholder, like a CEO or VP or a very high-powered customer, often saying no because, and here are options, is a really good kind of way to again, mitigate any impact to your strategy and give value to those stakeholders. So I'll go back to the problem, right? Go back to the product. So I flew out to Singapore. I met with the customer and I said to them, let's understand how it's sold and look at the fundamental problems. And when I thought about even the own product we had, there was 2 distinct problems that it solved. The problem 1 was the ability to ask questions, to gather all the data that you need in a life insurance application. So going back to, have you any heart problems? Yes. What type of heart problems are you? What medication are you taking? And when did this happen? Was it a family member? What family member? Is it hereditary? Right? And then diabetes, asking the same. And then the West Nile virus. The system shows you the West Nile virus questions. So it's really easy to get all those questions. So the ability to just be able to ask all those questions and get information was really powerful. Okay. The second aspect was getting a decision. So using all that data, running it through the algorithm and getting a response back to say yes or no. So I thought, well, that's 2 different problems. And if we kind of take the MVP approach, which, and Jeff had talked about this about the iterative way, what if the first part of the alternative solution might be if you can just ask questions at the point of sale and collect all the information. And if there was a Wi-Fi connection, right, you can provide a decision. So if it's connected online, you ask the questions and you get an answer saying yes or no. And if there's not a connection, you can still ask all of the questions. And then you say to the customer, the applicant, can I come back in 30 minutes? And I'll get you an answer. And you go and you find the nearest Wi-Fi hotspot, sync with the server, get a decision and call the customer. And the customer had said, when I went out to Singapore, had said, well, this is viable. This looks like it work. And I said, well, could we pilot this? And if it doesn't work, obviously we can then try to build out the second part, which is the logic of of yes or no, we will insure you. But even just asking those questions, does that deliver value? And they said yes. They were happy enough and thought, okay, so let's go with this. So I contacted a development partner we worked with in Eastern Europe, and worked on the requirements, did a quick brief overview of what this can look like. And it basically was just the ability to take the questions that we have in a big lump of JavaScript, load it into an app that's installed on your tablet, and all those questions are available to ask. And you get back and say, we can do this really, really quickly, and it would take about 50K, talk about 50,000 euro. So I was saying, don't do the 1.5 million deal. Let's charge it 50K instead. Doesn't sound like a business strategy, but we'll see how it goes. Lesson number 6, what I'd say is develop solution options. So to go back to, no, we can't do it because, and here's some solution options. Here's what we might be able to do. Okay. And what you're doing is you're putting you're giving a little bit of value back, but you're less than that major impact on your strategy. That any kind of crazy strategy or crazy initiative like this would have on it. Okay. So I presented these options. I went back and I presented this option, this new solution back to my CEO, my VP, and they went, Glenn, brilliant. Why didn't we think of this? We were nearly going to do this crazy, 1.5 million crazy offline tool, but you've convinced us not to do it, and we'll go with your solution. And that didn't happen either. Okay. And the reason it didn't happen, is I go back to what I learned before, is about pitching at the meeting, going in. So I had learned that even with this solution, it was going to be very, very hard to convince people with certain biases who've made commitments, or loose commitments, to change their course, to move off course and go to a different strategy. So I go back to being pragmatic, and being a product manager requires, in some states, some Machiavellian pragmatism. So you've got to be slightly, maybe say, underhanded. So I didn't make the same mistake as I made the last time by rocking up to a meeting and pitching my great idea, my great research, because I'd already realized, I'd learned from my mistake. I'd already realized that that doesn't work. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to find allies that can influence your detractors. So when I talk about Machiavellian, some Machiavellian tendencies or behavior, there is Machiavellian pragmatism. So what I did is I found stakeholders who were influential to my CEO, to my VP of sales, but where the strategy would impact them, okay, and would be allies with me in order to try get my version of no accepted by the CEO. So I contacted the VP of sales of EMEA. I contacted the VP of sales of North America, and I explained to them that, this is going to impact, obviously, our strategy for the US. It means that our European customers are not going to get as much value because we're going to have to cut back on improvements for them. And we're putting a lot of resources into this initiative, but I have an alternative solution that I think will work. And, obviously they have much more influence on the CEO and the VP sales than I have. They have seats at the table. So I worked with them in order for them to sow those seeds of doubt into the CEO about the strategy and to kind of push my agenda. So I kind of leveraged their influence in order for my no to be kind of accepted and my alternative solution to be addressed or accepted. So lesson number 7 was to establish relationships with influencers who can help support your argument. It's really important. It's really classic stakeholder management in product management. So again, saying no is very, very binary, but very, very binary. But if you say no, because, which is my research, and here's your solution, right? And get your stakeholders, your allies, your influential stakeholders in your group to influence your CEO or other influential stakeholders on your side, be able to explain the argument with you. It lends weight to your no, and even much better chance of it being accepted. So the result, what happened? Well, eventually I did. I used my stakeholders, I used my influencers to, have conversations with the CEO, have conversations with the VP, and say, I think it's great that obviously our business strategy is working. We're going to do really well in Asia, but there's a way we can do it where it's, it's spoke with Glen. Seems to have a good strategy in place. Customer seems to be willing to accept it. We should try it as an MVP, and then if it doesn't work, we need to go with a full hog with a strategy. It can always follow on. So they helped me with that. I presented, and this time I presented, with the minds, the bias in the room slightly changed, and it worked. I was given the go ahead to go with this pilot. And it was obviously on my head. If it didn't work, I was probably going to lose my job. But the result was, it was a really, really great success, the pilot program. So the applications rolled out in those 6 Asian nations, as well as 4 other subsidiaries. So the insurer themselves had 4 other brands that they had. So, smaller insurers. So it was rolled out in those. The customer then placed 10 million euro in orders over the next 3 years. So, although the 1.5 million deal turned into 50K, and remember the margin of that 1.5 million was small, but it turned into 10 million in orders, and then lots of recurring revenue from that over the next 3 years. The customer acted as a reference on other deals, so the customer was our testimonial. We just pointed people in them direction, said, they'll tell you how good we are. And the following year, I co-presented with the customer at the largest insurance tech event in the region. So the talk was about the value of partnerships. So, we got on stage and the customer talked about that, we were trusted advisors, right? So it wasn't this, come and take our money, 1.5 million, thank you. But actually we told them you're wasting your money doing that. Here's a better way to do it. We advised them on the best strategy, the best approach to enter the market. I was really successful. And that was a real catalyst for other deals in that region. Now my CEO still never liked me. I think we probably burned a few bridges, which, not just because of that, this instance, but I did manage to keep my job, which is the kind of the important thing. I didn't leave a few years later, but it was a successful end in a very kind of fraught time in my career. And, again, because saying no is really, really hard. It is hard. It was a stressful time. I condensed it down into 20, 30-minute talk here, but, it went on longer and there were ups and downs and times where I did feel like throwing the towel in, but I persevered. I kept on the crusade. So I suppose in summary, saying no, it is a fundamental function of PM. And, the theories will say, just say no, but that's hard, right? And being a PM is really hard. It's a hard job. We don't do a lot of easy things, but there is a certain level of pragmatism required, particularly when it's a very influential CEO. So when you've got a CEO or a senior exec and they're demanding, you do have a dilemma. So you need to keep your boss or your boss's boss happy, but you need to protect your product strategy. Okay. You remember, what can you do to mitigate the impact on your strategy, and still deliver some sort of value to to those senior stakeholders. No matter how valid or well constructed your research is, don't expect that it alone will change the minds of those with vested interests. The truth will not beat bias, unfortunately. And don't fall in love as a with your research. Even though it's brilliant, you've put a lot of work into it and you're really proud of it. Use it, leverage it, but there are other things you need to do too, not only your research. Okay. And what they are, you can present options that will help your stakeholders achieve their goals, but also, again, mitigate that impact to your product strategy. So solution options are really important. We, again, know, because, and here are options. That's a good kind of template to follow. And then I say, work with your allies to convince the wider stakeholder group of the merits of your recommendations. So influence your allies. As part of product managers, you should be networking, building connections, building allies in your organization. Leverage them, leverage their influence if you want to get decisions made. And even when you're trying to get a yes from somebody, okay, you're trying to get an initiative over the line, that's a good tactic to have. But when you're trying to say no, it can work really well in your favor. And that's it, folks. That's I said my whirlwind story of how I turned down 1.5 million deal, managed to convince senior stakeholders to do it, kept my job. It ended up successful. It was stressful. It's not a framework to say no by any means, but hope there were some lessons in there that were you can take and hopefully use, or at least learn from some of the mistakes I made. So thank you, folks. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Good luck.